Hey everybody, and welcome back. So we got our first bit of bad news today. So it looks like the target 14 May start date for travel out of Abu Dhabi, travel out of the UAE did not work out. In fact, it looks like they're going to push back flights as much as 2 full weeks all the way to the end of May. There are some limited flights that are running, but the problem is that here in the UAE, the borders are closed. Nobody is allowed in and nobody is allowed out. So the airlines that have managed to find a way around that are basically airlines that are flying people in to Abu Dhabi or into Dubai, but then those people do not leave the aircraft while the aircraft is refueling, and then the aircraft takes off again. So technically those people never enter inside UAE. And then of course they're not letting anybody in UAE depart except on very limited repatriation flights. So that's a little bit of a hiccup because we were hoping that after 2 previous iterations of opening borders, then transitioning to closing borders or keeping borders closed, we were kind of hoping that this 3rd iteration would actually resolve in flights being allowed. But it looks like that's not the case. So it looks like the next date that people are talking about is June 4th as the earliest date that transit would be allowed across out of UAE. And of course, we're trying to get out of UAE. So that makes things complicated. So how does that make things complicated? Everybody knows that you all know that we're trying to go somewhere, and we're still deciding where exactly we want to go, but it becomes a major challenge if we're not allowed to go anywhere. Because essentially, in order to prepare to leave, you have to start ending all of your lease agreements, rental agreements, and everything you have where you are with a plan to leave. But we can do that, and we will do that, set the date that we plan to leave, but we may have this scenario now where we plan to leave, basically the date that we say we will leave our apartment, we might not actually be able to leave the country. So we might have to find some sort of interim place to live still inside UAE before we leave the country. There's also all sorts of questions in the air about when they do open borders, whether or not flights will be available to all locations. So we might pick Costa Rica, we might pick Morocco, but if we pick that location, that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a flight that's going to that location when we plan to leave. So all of this creates complications. So how do we plan to get past that complication? Well, first, we started creating a list of contingency plans. So just like we spoke in a previous video about having built-in time, of course that time is now serving us very well. We have buffer time. But now we also need to have contingency plans. If we want to go to city A or we want to go to country A, but we can't get a flight to country A and we can get a flight to country B, then obviously we have to be ready to go to country B. The same thing kind of happens if we can't leave UAE. If we have plans to go to country A but we can't leave UAE, then we have to be able to go to a staging place in UAE until we get the ability to leave to go to country A. And then of course we might have the situation where we can't leave, so we have to go to a staging place, and when we can finally leave, we still can't go to country A, so we have to go to country B. Either way, these are all contingency plans that we're gonna have to build. That shouldn't be too difficult because what we know is that shipping is still happening. So all of the stuff that we have here that we don't want to take with us, we plan to ship back. We don't have much. We travel very light, but whenever you travel to a foreign country, what you'll find is you'll start to collect things that mean something. Special pieces of art, special gifts, certain things that are delicate or fragile, and you don't want to take them country to country. So we always have at least a small shipment that we send back to the United States. So the good news is that shipment that we've already kind of put together is going to be able to go back to the United States regardless of when we decide to ship it, because the borders are open to shipping. So we'll be able to send back a chunk of our stuff with no problems. So the only thing we have to worry about is what we want to take with us. And since we know that most flights will accept 30 kilograms per person, and you can always buy extra weight on top of that, not that we need that much weight, but we'll basically just plan to pack all of our stuff early and make sure that everybody is within their 30 kilogram weight limit. Now with 5 tickets technically when we include our nanny, we've each got 5 tickets. That means each person's allowed to carry 30 kilograms, and 30 kilograms is pretty heavy. It's over 60 pounds. So everybody in the family is going to have the opportunity to carry plenty of weight in terms of luggage. So I don't see us having any problems being a veritable walking tortoise family where everybody's carrying what they own on their back. or pushing it in a cart. So that's good, because then whether or not we have to stage somewhere else in UAE, or whether we have to go to country A before we can get to country B, or vice versa, however we have to kind of finagle our way to the next location, we're going to be able to do it. It's stressful, it's not ideal. I know a lot of you out there might sound intimidated when you think about the idea that your plan might be ruined from underneath you, or might be pulled out from underneath you, but that's just kind of the nature of travel. That's the nature of living abroad. Plans are great, but what I find is the best thing to do is to be prepared. Prepared with a plan, but also prepared for a plan to fail. So that's where we stand right now. We know that we're not going anywhere anytime soon. We had already planned to travel in mid to late June, so having flights be closed until early June doesn't really impact us much. But now what we do know is we need to really dig deep into contingency planning. What do we do if we can't leave UAE? What if we do if we can leave UAE, but we can't go to the country that we want to go to? And then what are our different staging points in the UAE and in a foreign country? So that's going to be our next challenge as we work through that, and I'll make sure to give you that plan as soon as we have it. But this is kind of our first hiccup in terms of something getting in the way of our plan, and I wanted to make sure I shared that with you as soon as I had it. More coming. Thanks for tuning in.